Howdy folks, Cal Kellogg here. Lucy and I are out for our walk and we actually just saw a bear. It was pretty cool. It's mid-September. They're active right now. We're seeing bear tracks every day. I'm seeing a bear pretty much every other week, and I've heard quite a few of them down in the tree line this week that we didn't actually see, but they're around enough that I know what they sound like. So they're out and about. The one we saw this morning was absolutely beautiful. Wasn't a huge bear. I actually shot some video of his tracks, but he was maybe 100 and some pounds, but he was chocolate colored and he had some blonde on his back. He kind of had that classic grizzly coloration. He wasn't a grizzly bear. He was just a small to medium-sized black bear, but he sure was pretty. And when he saw us, he took off like a scalded cat. But anyhow, I'm not here to talk about bears this morning, though. I'm here to talk about the West Delta. That is our fishing destination of the week. I've been spending a little time out in the West Delta recently, and I have an extensive history out there. I don't know how much I'm going to fish it this fall, probably a couple more times, but I am very trout focused these days. But let's talk about the West Delta. I remember back when I wrote my first Delta fishing book, I got a lot of feedback from folks that told me after they read the book, it was the first time that they had ever had any success fishing the Delta. And you know, based on my research, it's a small group of guys that catch most of the fish in the Delta. Maybe 10% of the anglers catch 90% of the fish out there. You know, the Delta as a whole, it's a big place. There's 1,200 miles of waterways. But my favorite area, and the area I'm going to talk about today, is the West Delta. And I define that this way. On the top end, I think about light 35 and 35A on the San Joaquin. And then if you drew a straight line over from there to the Sacramento mouth of 3 Mile Slough and, you know, over to the West Bank, the traditional kind of striper trolling area on the Sacramento, that would be one leg. And then if you took the other, you know, the other two legs to make a triangle and just drew lines down to the Benicia Bridge encompassing all Sassoon Bay, Montezuma Slough, Sassoon Slough, and all that water off Pittsburgh, that's my favorite area to fish. That is the tidal mixing zone. That is the place where the fish arrive first, both stripers and sturgeon, and that's a place where a lot of fish hang out all winter long. So, you know, it's September 15th today as I film this. Things are starting to happen out in the Delta. Actually, it's been pretty good for a while out there, but things are going to get a whole lot better. The Rio Vista Striper Derby is right around the corner. I just finished doing our insert in the Fish Sniffer magazine about the Rio Vista Derby, so this seemed like a perfect time to talk about, you know, fishing the West Delta. Now, there's a lot of different fish species out there, man. There's everything from crappie to carp, black bass, catfish, and more. But the marquee species out there are stripers and sturgeon. And I know there's some specialized guys that they like to catch their stripers while plugging, but those guys already know the water really well. They know what they're doing. They're either, you know, Delta rats or they're black bass guys that go out there looking for stripers. So I'm not going to talk about plugging. That's kind of a specialized thing. I'm talking about bait fishing and trolling. And here's some general rules of thumb about both sturgeon and striper fishing. You may get bites all day long when the fishing's good on both the in and outgoing tides, okay? But most of the time, the most intense bites are at the ends of the tides. And I never worried about whether it was an incoming tide or an outgoing tide. If I had a preference, I like outgoing tides. But as a general rule, in, out, it doesn't matter. It's the last hour of any tide and the first hour of any tide when the feeding is most intense. And that goes for both stripers and sturgeon. When the bite is tough, that may be your only window of opportunity. When the bite's good, you'll probably get bites throughout the day, but the most intense action is going to be at those times of either the tide slowing down or the tide picking up. That's just the way it is. And that goes for daytime fishing, nighttime fishing, all that. You know, when I got my first sponsored boat, I spent a lot of overnights out in Montezuma Slough and other places, and I thought, man, this is going to be a tidal wave. I'm going to be out here at night and it's going to be great. It was good. I caught a lot of fish, but it was still a tidal bite. The beginning and end of the tide, middle of the tides, that was time to take a nap. Anyhow, let's start off with striper trolling. It's basic. It's very basic. They run basically two lures in the Delta. They run Yozuri and P-line minnow plugs. They run shallow runners and they run deep runners. And everybody tips their plugs with a worm. Everybody fishes with braid out there. You want to be fishing with anywhere from 30 to 65 pound braid. You want to run a 36 to 48 inch, 25 to 30 pound test fluorocarbon or mono leader. That's what you run your plugs off of. I've got plug rigging tutorials here on the channel. If you want to see that, you can find them. The recipes for success out there are this. If you're running the shallow runners, you want to keep the boat in 6 to 8 feet of water. You want to troll at 5 miles an hour, and you want that plug anywhere from 100 to 130 feet behind the boat. That's going to put that plug in the strike zone at those depths. If you're running the deep runners, back your speed off to 2.5 or 3 miles an hour, and you want to work that zone that's 11 to 15 feet deep. That's going to put you in the zone. As a general rule, you want to be running 100 feet of line, but basically run the line out until you feel the plug hit bottom, and then reel in a couple cranks. You might only be 60 feet back. You might be 110 feet back. It doesn't matter. But those are your recipes for success while trolling. Stay on the move until you find the fish. When you find the fish, stay on them. Work that area. You might end up working a 100-yard stretch of bank for the entire duration of that tidal period and catch fish after fish after fish. I trolled a lot back in the day with the great Mark Wilson. I've trolled with Clyde Wands, Barry Canavero, and I specifically remember one day I was out with Mark. We found the bass right at the Rio Vista Bridge. We worked a very small area for about an hour and a half, and we caught 35 fish. That was during an August trip, and those were nice fish. They went anywhere from 5 to 15 pounds on the upper end. So when you find the fish, stay on them until that bite peters out. I like to stay away from other boats. I don't like to be out there with a big flotilla of boats. Sometimes you go out to the West Bank and you would think that's the only place in the Delta where there's stripers. Try to find your own fish. You're just going to do better without all that boat traffic over the top of them. So moving on, bait fishing for stripers. The striper is a wonderful fish because they're very forgiving in terms of what they'll take. You can plug for them, you can troll for them, and you can soak a variety of baits for them. But your mainstream baits are shad, sardines, liver, bullheads, and mudsuckers. Those are your primary baits. If you have any questions about rigging them, we fish them all on a sliding sinker rig with a 25-pound test leader and a large octopus hooks as a general rule. If you have any questions on how to rig these baits, stop by one of the Delta bait shops and they will be happy to show you how to do it. Beyond that, when the water's warm like it is now, I like to fish the channel edges anywhere from 20 to 30 feet deep. Find the marks, find the fish, set on them. As the water cools, you could find those stripers, particularly the large ones, in shallower and shallower water. A lot of times I'll be fishing in 5 feet of water, 3 feet of water, and catching a lot of fish. You can get right up next to those tulies. That's where the fish go to hunt. That's where they go to feed. And you can do very well working shallow water areas in the Delta. Whether you're fishing for sturgeon or stripers, rely on the sonar. Lucy's looking around. Maybe that bear's still creeping around. Rely on your sonar. If you're not seeing marks, you're not going to catch fish. Find the marks, anchor the boat, and the time to be looking for fish is not at the tide change. You want to look for marks in the middle of the tide, and you want to work those marks when the tide is slowing down and when the tide is picking up. So sturgeon. Stripers are fairly easy to catch in the Delta. With a little practice, you'll be on some stripers. It's going to be a great fall. October, November, they're going to be very good. Sturgeon are tough to catch in California. I'm not going to lie to you. Patience is your friend. Sonar unit, absolutely critical. Early in the fall, expect the fish to be deep, 30 to 50 feet deep. As the fall progresses, expect those fish to move shallower. Two baits, really. Shrimp baits, they work. They absolutely work. You're going to get a lot of junk bites on shrimp baits. Concentrate on what the guides, what the skippers use. Salmon roe, eel. Play with those two baits. Uncured eel or uncured salmon roe rather, and eel right out of the package. Just put a strip of it on a hook. It looks like a horrible presentation. They'll hit that. And, I don't swing at everything. I let my rod get in full pump mode, and when I can feel the fish pumping, I set the hook. I catch my share of sturgeon. I'm no sturgeon master, but that's kind of how I approach sturgeon fishing out there. It's a game of patience, and it's a lot of fun. It's very satisfying when you hook one, because it is not easy for the average guy to go out there and get a sturgeon, particularly a keeper sturgeon. Let's kind of close this out talking a little bit about tackle. If I'm trolling for stripers or bait fishing for stripers, I like a fairly light rod, like the SHS rods, the striper halibut salmon rods I'm offering. You want a fast action tip, you want a little bit of backbone, you want a trigger stick, you want a fairly long grip on that rod, level wind reel on top of it. You know, I spool up with 65-pound test braid. That's my basic rod. When you throw sturgeon into the equation, it's good to have a heavier rod on the boat. You know, ugly stick tiger, a Phoenix 808, something like that. Something you can handle 12 to even 16 ounces of weight with when you're fishing those deeper water areas in big current. You know, you need to use big sinkers sometimes, and not only do you have to cast them and retrieve them, you've got to set the hook against that sinker when a sturgeon comes biting. So you need a stick you can put the wood to them with. And hey, let's face it, you know, you're probably going to catch a sturgeon that's anywhere from 30 to 60 inches long, but you might find yourself hooked up with a 10-foot monster. So, you know, sturgeon tackle, you can go a little heavier. I've landed a lot of sturgeon on striper gear over the years, but when I'm targeting sturgeon, I like to go a little bit heavier with the rod. And, you know, sometimes they'll hit shad. Sometimes you'll be sitting there and your striper rod will go off and you'll hook a sturgeon on a shad. Unfortunately, now you can't keep those fish because, you know, when you're out striper fishing, you're fishing with a barbed hook. And the requirement is now, if you're going to keep a sturgeon, he has to be caught on a barbless hook. So they're still fun to catch, however, so good times. And once in a while, you'll even get a sturgeon on a live bait. I got one night in Montezuma Slough on a live bullhead, and I was lucky I didn't have to pull the anchor. I was by myself. He was about 7 feet long, and I fought him in. At first, I thought I had a big clump of weeds. He hit right in the middle of the tide. The clicker started going on the reel. I was in my sleeping bag, and I was like, man, I think I got some weeds on there. And kept hearing the clicker going, and I was like, man, I think those weeds are just going to take all my line. I better get up. And I got up, picked up that rod, lifted it to like shake off the weeds, and it was like, and for a little while I thought I had a giant striper on until it started jumping and splashing around, and then it was clear, man, I had a sturgeon on. So anyhow, that's kind of it. The West Delta, if you want stripers and sturgeon, we are coming into the prime time of the year in one of the West Coast's most exciting fisheries. I mean, I fished it a lot when I first started getting sponsored boats, and we'll fish it this year. But like I say, I'm a trout junkie, you know, in my soul, I'm a trout junkie. So I'm gonna be out creeping around at places like Lake Davis and Elmonor and stuff. But if you want to go big, you want some stripers, you want some sturgeon, and you want to fish a very unique fishery, get out into the West Delta, learn the ropes a little bit, put in your time, and you're going to be one of those 10%ers, one of the guys that catches 90% of the fish out there. But it does take an investment in time. I've just kind of shared the basics with you. There is a learning curve. Just remember, trust your sonar, go with the basics, and work the beginnings and ends of those tides, and you'll dial in your strategy from there. But that's the basics. Anyway, it's a wonderful fishery. It's a very special place for me and a lot of folks here in Northern California. Anyway, have fun out there. Enjoy it. We got some great fishing coming up. It's going to go strong until, you know, Thanksgiving or after, depending on the conditions and the temperature. Oh, I should mention temperature in closing. Kind of 50 degrees. When the water gets below 50 degrees in the Delta, in the West Delta, it can get tough. It can get very tough. That January is a tough time to catch fish out there. Usually the water's in the 40s. But down to 50, you can have very good action. 56 is the peak. Sturgeon and striper fishing is very good in the mid-50s, 56, 55, 58. When the water's in that temperature zone, those fish are frisky, they're hungry, they're on the move, and they're feeding. When it drops down below 50, things get extremely slow. That's the time to work on your tackle and get ready for spring, because everything I just described for the fall is going to happen again in the spring. When the temperature ramps back up into the 50s, those fish that have been kind of semi-dormant, when they come to life, they start moving around, and they are hungry and they got spawning on their mind. So anyway, the West Delta, it's a magical place. Get out there and get after those fish, guys, and we'll catch you here next time with another great fishing destination here in Northern California. I'm Kel Kellogg. I got to get back to my walk. I'm signing off.